What's up guys, Josh here, and in today's video we're going to take a look at how much it costs you to actually run your entire gaming setup. So not just your PC, but everything, monitors, keyboard, mouse. How much does it actually cost to run your setup? So typically when you think about how much it costs to run a gaming PC, you're really only thinking about the PC itself. So your graphics card, your CPU, how much wattage is that going to draw, and then converting that over to dollars. But there's a lot more to a gaming setup than just your PC. You have your monitors, your keyboard, your mouse, all the peripherals that go along with gaming. You can't just game with a PC. You have to have all those peripherals as well. So for the sake of this video, I have my entire setup connected to a single surge protector. So just everything, all my peripherals, the PC itself, connected to the same surge protector, and then that into a wattage meter, and then of course into the wall, so we can get a readout of the exact amount of power that my entire setup consumes. And this setup is an i9 9900K with a GTX 1660 Super, so pretty good CPU. It's gonna consume a decent amount of power just based on the 8 cores, 16 threads, and the high frequency. I have it overclocked to 4.9 gigahertz on all cores. The 1660 Super, not the craziest amount of power draw. You're looking at max 125 watts for that GPU. So if you have something higher tier, an RTX 3070, 3080, or even higher, you could be looking at 300, 400, 500 watts of power consumption peak. And then we have two 27-inch 1440p monitors, and then just keyboard and mouse pretty much completes the peripheral setup. So how much do you guys think that this system draws at just typical gaming levels of performance, whether it's playing COD or Valorant? What are your guesses? Leave those in the comments below. But overall, the system, the entire setup's pretty mid-tier when it comes to power consumption. We shouldn't be using the crazy amount of power of like 1,000-watt power supply and like a super ultra-wide gaming monitor. But we do have two 27s and a mid-range gaming PC. So to start things off, let's just boot up Windows and see what kind of power draw we're just getting, and just having the system run at idle. So we start off just base power consumption of like 8 watts, and we immediately jump up to like 100 watts just starting the computer, hitting the power button, and that slowly continues to rise until we finally boot into Windows. Not even boot into Windows, just boot into the BIOS. And as we boot into the BIOS, we're sitting at around 150 watts. And then as we boot into Windows, just getting to the sign-in screen, we're all the way up to 225 watts, just loading, your typical programs in the background. Around 225 watts of power consumption for the entire setup. And now as we continue to shut down monitors, we're looking at around drops to 160 watts if we shut off one, and 135 if we shut down the other. So around 100 watts of power consumption just from my monitors. So now we jump into a game of Call of Duty, and we're sitting at around 325 watts average of power consumption for the entire setup. So the two monitors and the PC, and as we drop into Verdansk, we're sitting right around that 335 watt mark, and that'll jump up to 380, but it'll pretty much average around 330 watts. With around 65 or so watts coming from just the CPU. Because we're at 100% power usage on that GPU, you're probably looking at around 125 watts. So total power consumption from the CPU and GPU around 190 watts. And then you're looking at the rest coming from just the other CPU components, RAM, hard drives, things like that. And then of course the 100 watts from the monitor. And now when we jump into Valorant, similar game when it comes to CPU usage, around 30%. Very high GPU usage, and we're sitting at around 340 watts in this game as well. Similar in terms of CPU being at around 70 watts, GPU being maxed out around that 125 watt mark. So again, you're looking at around 350 watts overall to run this system heavy in games. So this is running at 1440p and around 240 FPS. And for the most part, it's running extremely smoothly at those settings and only using 350 watts of power, which is honestly pretty low if you think about an entire gaming setup. I would have expected the PC itself to be using 350 watts, let alone both monitors and the rest of my peripheral setup as well. So at around 350 watts, we're also outputting around 70 degrees of heat, 7 degrees Celsius of heat from our GPU, and around 45 to 50 on our CPU. So now, just to get an idea of what a maxed out CPU is going to do to our power consumption, we're going to run Cinebench R23. And just for kind of connotation, if you put this max voltage or this max wattage of 345 watts when running Cinebench, so our CPU maxed out at 100%, GPU pretty much at idle, and if we were to add that around 100 to 125 watts of full GPU usage, so if we maxed out our CPU and GPU at the exact same time, you'd be looking at around 475 to 500 watts, which is kind of what you'd expect from the system itself with an i9 and a 1660 Super. But again, it's 500 watts for the entire setup, so the 2 monitors, peripherals, like I said, everything combined at around 500 watts if you were to max out the entire system. So now let's translate that power consumption, just that pure wattage, into an actual cost value of how much it might actually run you to play and game on your setup for an entire year. So at around 350 watt average for our system, let's say it's a couple hours at idle, maybe you're watching some YouTube, and then a few hours of pure gaming at the maximum amount of power consumption that your entire setup is going to output. Let's just say average around 400 watts. And maybe you use your computer for 5 hours a day. So 400 watts times 5 hours is 2,000 watt hours per day. And we can translate that over to kilowatt hours, and that's around 2 kilowatt hours per day of power consumption from your gaming setup. So even if you gamed every single day of the year, 365 days a year, 2 kilowatt hours, that would run you right around, let's say, 750 kilowatt hours, give or take. So 750 kilowatt hours for the entire year of running your gaming setup, gaming, watching videos, doing everything you might do on your computer, would run you around $75 for the year. Give or take 10 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on where you live. It may be a little bit more, it may be a little bit less. But let's just say 10 cents a kilowatt hour, 750 kilowatt hours. Pretty simple math, $75 to run your setup for a year. Honestly, not too bad. When you think about it, maybe you spend $1,200 on a system like this. Nowadays, probably like $1,500 on a system like this. But again, the higher power consumption system that you go with, RTX 30 series, whatever it might be, the more it's going to cost you. But you're probably going to top out at around $200, $250 a year. And compared to the cost of the system itself, the entire setup itself, it's a very small amount of money to actually run the system compared to the upfront cost of buying a system and getting all of the peripherals that you need. So what do you guys think? Was that kind of what you were expecting around that cost to run your setup? Were you expecting more, expecting less? Definitely leave those in the comments below. If you have any questions, leave them down there as well. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, definitely get subscribed to the channel, turn on post notifications so you can stay up to date on all my latest videos. And I hope to see you guys in the next one.